Now, there's something I do pretty much every single time I come to edit a photo, whether it's a portrait, a landscape, whatever it might be. I will try and hone in on the subject. And by that, I mean I will try and draw the viewer's eye to the subject. Sometimes that means isolating it from the background. Sometimes that means really just pointing the viewer where I want them to look. We're going to look at how I do that specifically using exposure, using color, a bit of masking, and in Lightroom Classic in particular, we're going to look at lens blur as well. So a few different techniques. We're really going to be touching on pretty much everything in Lightroom today. Let's get into it. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh, yes indeed, a nice fresh photography tutorial. Let's just dive straight into this one. Now, the photo we're going to be looking at is this one here. It's kind of a portrait. This is actually taken at an event we held at the Kent Cookery School. But, you know, I like the photo a lot, but there's a lot that we can maybe do with this. The lighting is all natural, so there's no flash or anything like that. And so we're dealing with a little bit of an interesting kind of exposure. We've got most of the natural light coming in from those windows over on the left side of the frame. Let's dive into how I'm going to really draw the viewer to our subject here. There's a few different things I'm going to do. Now, before I would go any further with this photo, I'd actually scroll down in Lightroom and I'm going to go ahead and enable profile corrections, which is just going to get rid of any kind of distortion or any kind of vignetting from the lens. This was taken on the Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master lens, as you can see. And I'm actually going to go ahead and click auto on the transform tab here as well. And Lightroom's going to go ahead, there we go, and just straighten this up. So that immediately really helps. I might even crop in a little bit. I'll tell you why. I don't love this window just creeping in on the left of the frame there. So I'm going to do something like this, which I think is going to just be a little bit less distracting. There we go. Okay, maybe even, there we go. I think that's a little bit less distracting. We've still got a nice window with natural light over here, but we don't have this window creeping in on the left, which I think was just taking away something from the photo. So, okay, great. We've kind of sorted that out a little bit. What I might do next is just some very light global editing. So a little bit of contrast. I might just bring the highlights up a touch, not too far. Shadows, I might just bring them up a touch as well, and a little bit of clarity to the whole thing as well. Otherwise, just maybe a touch of vibrance. And I'm pretty happy with where that is. Now, at any point during your edit, you can always see how far you've come by pressing the / key on your keyboards. This was before, this is after. So not a huge amount, a little bit of a global edit and a little bit of straightening. You can also see a before and after next to each other by pressing Y, which can be really helpful. At this point though, you know what? We've not done that much to the photo. It's a little bit brighter. That's the main thing. So what would I do next to really try to isolate my subject here? Well, there's a few different techniques, and we're going to start by looking at the exposure. So I'll come up here to the masking panel. This is almost all going to be in masking in terms of the actual exposure part of this. And we're going to go radial gradient. There's a few different ways we can do this, but I like to start by bringing in a little bit of a radial gradient over what my subject's going to be. Now, in a portrait, it's very obvious. It's the person in the scene. Let's bring the exposure up a little bit. In a landscape, it'll be whatever the subject of the landscape is, and so on. Food photography, product photography, it's pretty clear what the subject is. Identifying the subject, I will tend to pop a little radial gradient with a nice big feather, right? So it's nice and feathered, and then just bump that exposure up a little bit. I've done that here just to make sure our subject is the brightest part of the scene. You can see the differences in making mask 1 here. If I click and hold on this little eye icon, you can see we're just adding a bit of brightness there. Now, immediately, when it comes to the exposure, the next thing I'm going to do is go for another radial gradient and do a much bigger one. Again, feathers at 100. And this time I'm going to click invert. That means that we're going to turn this inside out, and we're going to be affecting everything kind of outside the circle. But with a nice big feather, that transition is pretty good, right? So we're going to bring the exposure down now. What we're doing is creating a bit of a vignette around our subject. I'm going to make sure this is nice and big. And again, if we just click this eye icon, look at that, we're darkening the outer parts of this image. Now that's fairly straightforward, right? That's fairly basic, to be completely honest with you. What I would actually do next is take this even further. There are parts of this image that I don't think need to be particularly bright at all. And part of that is actually down here in this kind of bottom third. I'm going to go ahead and go for a linear gradient and just bring that up from the bottom, something like this. So again, I want to feather it in, and I'll bring that exposure down, right? We can darken that because it's not adding that much to the image. And we want to bring the viewer's eye up to our subject in the middle of the scene here. I think we could also possibly do this from the top down. So let's go ahead and do another linear gradient, do the same sort of thing, top down like this. And actually what we can do here is right click on this one, intersect mask with, and select background. And that's going to specifically apply that behind our subject. So it's going to do that linear gradient. It's going to apply it everywhere that it intersects with what Lightroom considers to be the background, which is everything that isn't our subject. And then I'm going to darken that a touch there. Now, we don't want to go too far. If I go too far, you're going to start seeing the difference here. I might want to move this up. I might want to do something like that, but I don't want to darken it too much. Something like that, I think works pretty well. Now, immediately, if I press the backslash key on our keyboard here, that was before, this is after. Let's look at the before and after side by side. So we are starting to really focus the viewer's attention onto our subject here. He's the brightest part of the scene, apart from the window, but that's understandable. We don't want it to look unnatural. And we've darkened some of the areas around him so that we really are getting our viewer's eye focused in on him. Now, next, we're going to try and use color to bring our viewer's eye to our subject. And for this, I'm going to actually scroll down to the HSL tab, which is a really, really good way of color grading our photo a little bit. So for this one, we're going to start off with the hue setting here. And this is where we can affect the actual hue of the color. I mean, no big surprise, right? And what I want to do is actually affect some of this green in the background, this green basket, which I think is a little bit distracting. And I want to give this a little bit of a different feel. So I'm going to start off by bringing the oranges down a little bit. I want to warm up some of this wood. Now that is going to affect the actual skin tones. If I was to do that too much, you would see the skin tones become very red. So we just want to warm that a little bit, bring that down into sort of a burnt area. I'm going to bring the yellows down as well, make them a little bit more burnt so we get this really nice rich feel to things. Same with the greens. I kind of want to bring that down towards the yellows, but you can see it's not making a huge amount of difference. We're going to play around with the saturation of the green in a second because that is going to make a bigger difference. And with the blues, I am going to bring it towards the kind of teal side of things and the aqua towards the blue, just to kind of bring those together. Since we've gone for this kind of rich, little bit orange and teal, we're going to see where this goes. I like the look of this immediately, right? Let's go into saturation now. The first one I want to do is the greens. I want to bring that right down. I want to affect the green in the background here, and I want to affect the green of this basket. Now, it hasn't affected it as much as I'd like, so we're going to come back to that in a second. The yellows will also affect the greens a little bit, but I want to kind of leave them not too affected because they are affecting other parts of the image as well. Oranges, I'm just going to boost that saturation just a touch. I'm going to come over to luminance as well and bring that green down a little bit. Now, again, it's not doing too much, but it is affecting that background a little bit and this basket. Now, the basket clearly needs a slightly different touch. So this is where I would come in and actually click up here on point color. So same tab, the color mixer tab, but we're going to get point color. And this allows us to actually affect individual colors within the scene. We can use this eyedropper tool to sample a color. So I'm going to click on the green of this basket like so. Then I can control this down here. So I can actually click on this actual tick box here to visualize the range, and it shows me what I have selected in terms of color. And it is literally just this basket. So I want to bring the saturation down of this, and I'm actually going to affect the hue a little bit as well. Something like this, and maybe just darken it as well. And if I turn off the visualize range, that's making such a bigger difference now. Let's actually click and hold on this eye icon on the color mixer to see exactly how much color grading we've done. So this was before we started any of this color grading, and this is after. Look how much green we've taken out of this, how much we've richened this up. I'm really liking the look of it. I'm really liking the look of it. And it's taking away some of the distracting elements, the green basket, the background. We're really going for this tone to the image, right? Which I think suits it really well. Now we can go even further with this color grade by scrolling all the way down to the calibration tab right at the bottom, where I'm going to primarily use the red primary and the blue primary. Now this is going to affect the image in big ways, right? So we can affect the hue of it, we can affect the saturation of it. We can go in with the greens as well. For example, if we were to start doing the saturation on the green, it is going to bring out quite a lot of the color of that basket, but it is going to affect other parts of the image as well. And that's the thing about the calibration. You want to be a little bit subtle, bit of a light touch, because it is going to affect every part of the image, even bits you don't think it's going to affect. Like the blue primary, for example, will massively affect even the skin tones, because we're really fundamentally playing with the kind of core colors that are making up everything else in the image. So with the red primary, I'm actually going to move the hue a little bit over towards the orange, not too much, and the blue primary a little bit over towards the sort of teal side of things. And if I click and hold on this eye icon, you can see before and after. It's not making a massive difference. It's pretty subtle, but it looks even richer, the colors. And I like it. I'm a big fan of it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is actually come all the way back to the top. I'm going to go for a new mask. I want to add in a little bit more orange, a little bit more warm tones to parts of this image. Radial gradient over on the right side of things where we've got these different lights. I'm going to pop that in, and I'm going to add some warm color temperature to this. I might even add another radial gradient over here, something like this, with some warm tones around this kind of wood here. Now, again, I think this looks really nice. Okay, that's probably enough for that. We could now go in and adjust some of the masks we've got. So for example, the mask that is affecting the kind of vignette, we could actually darken that even further, something like this. We could actually go in and do an even tighter vignette, something like this, to really darken around our subject and focus the area that is not affecting more on our subject's face here. If I turn that off and back on, yeah, we are really affecting that in quite a big way. If I was to really overdo it, you would see that in a big, big way. But again, I quite like what we've done here now with this. So let's look at the before and after. So before, this is where we started. You can see we've made a big difference to the exposure and to the color, because this is where we've ended up, right? We've color graded it. We've done massive stuff to the exposure. And the last thing I want to do to really separate the subject here from the background, I'm going to come down. I'm going to go to the lens blur. Right now, this is something that was added in last year into Lightroom. If we go ahead and click apply here, Lightroom's going to work out who our subject is, where our subject is, and then how far into the image they are and how far the background is and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to apply additional blur. So there's almost a shallower depth of field to the image. And I would say that generally speaking, Lightroom does a pretty good job. And you can see here, it has done a very good job. I actually think that part of this does look a little bit too fake. So I'm going to just bring the blur amount down here, down to something like 20, I think is going to probably work for the purposes of this photo. Let's turn that off and back on. It's pretty subtle, to be honest with you. So let's bring it up to something like 35. 36 is fine. I think that looks pretty good. That does look pretty good, I think. I could bring it up. Do you know what? Finding the sweet spot. Sometimes you got to play around a little bit. Let's go 30. There we go. I really like that. Right, I really, really like that. Now we can change some other stuff. We've actually got a whole video where we talked about the lens blur when it first came out, where you can change different aspects of what it's doing. But I think for us, what we want to do is just have it relatively subtle. We're just accentuating that shallow depth of field. We don't want to fake a whole new shallow depth of field. We've already got a little bit of one there because it was shot, this was shot at f1.4 with the Sony 50mm. So we've already got a little bit of a blurred background. Let's do one final before and after. So the backslash key, this was before, this is after. It's a much richer photo. We've got much richer tones. I like the kind of darker tones we've gone for before. After, let's look side by side. So we've got the before on the left, the after on the right. I love what we've done with it, if I want to say you. I love the feel of the photo, the kind of style of it. And that's a big part of this, right? Is we are bringing our viewers' attention to our subject and away from other distractions. We've removed some color distractions. We've used exposure to draw the viewer's eye where we want it to go. And then we've used lens blur to just separate a little bit more the subject from the background. And while I won't use every single one of those tools in every photo, because that's a bit much, right? I will do this technique generally pretty much for every photo that I go for. Whether it is, like I say, landscape, whether it is portrait, product photography, whatever it might be, I'll use these different editing techniques just to try and draw the viewer's eye where I want it to go. Now, of course, we did touch in a big way on color grading in this video as well, but we are going to do a whole video all about color grading in Lightroom Classic. I love doing it. I think you can get a really interesting look to your photo. There's a lot of style that you can put into it. We're going to go through all of that in depth, but if there's anything else you'd like to see, let me know down in the comments, because I'm always keen to make the videos that you want to see, the tutorials that are most useful to you, whether it is something in Lightroom, maybe a different photo editing software. Bit of Capture One, maybe. I've been meaning to get back to it. Oh, indeed, indeed. We might look at some of the Photoshop AI features because there's some big new stuff there as well. It's a very interesting space to talk about because on one hand, it's amazing. And on the other hand, it's a little bit concerning. In fact, I'd love to know what you think about that or how you feel about that. That'd be really interesting to talk about maybe in a future video. For now though, you can check out a full list of all the kit we use to film these videos, take these photos, all this kind of stuff by checking out the links down in the description. I will see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.